Afternoon, everybody.
Afternoon.
We're running late, so let's get started. Welcome to the February 20th regulatory review meeting for more fun and games. First up, vote minutes, November 21, 2024. Anybody remember November 24?
Were these for this, were they regulatory meeting or just regular?
Yes.
Yes.
So, yeah, I was at that one. I'll move to accept the minutes as written.
All right, we got a motion and a second to accept the minutes of November 21st. Any comments or questions? We're voting. All
Aye.
ayes?
Aye.
We're so used to waiting for
I
you to
know.
call our name.
All right. Recap from last meeting, last hearing. It's not really a hearing.
I should have said.
Scratch that. Strike that from the minutes. All right. We'll let Alyssa give a recap.
Well, so we also haven't gone over from the December meeting as well. So do you want to start there? So
Right.
A little further back. So I sent you guys the updated review from that. We started out talking about fire pit and patio areas, and we talked about sheds. We kind of separated the two topics. So we predominantly focused on sheds at that time. So Jen has written up a draft revision to the regs for everyone's review. To those who looked through it, did that look acceptable?
I took out the word structure, I just put shed not to exceed 200 square feet, because we were getting too much in the weeds about what constitutes a shed, which, you know, and honestly, we just care about the footprint of the structure, not what they use
What's
the,
inside?
yeah,
What's
the
inside.
internal,
Yeah.
yeah, whether they're storing a lawnmower or a TV and a couch. So,
And why are you limiting it to 200? Is it V-zone? Is that what it is, 200
no,
square
I
feet?
think that's, we're just going in line with the building department. They're 200
shed.
square feet, I believe, right, Jamie?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
I
we
thought the
just,
200, I'm sorry, I thought the 200 square feet thing was that if it was less than 200 square feet, you did not need a building permit. Over 200 square feet, you do, am I correct?
that is correct, in the building
Yes.
permit, you have
Yeah.
always needed a COMCOM permit for a shed,
Right,
because we mitigate for
so
that.
I mean,
No, but what Courtney's saying, so there's two ways we're using that 200. You're correct, a shed under 200 square feet does not require a building permit. But we've been using the 200, which is the exemption to the FEMA.
right,
So that's what the building department allows. So we have just historically followed that.
right.
Um,
Yeah, I'm mostly, yeah, I'm trying to clarify in my mind,
Yeah,
you know.
Well, I think what it is
I mean,
we're
if the
trying,
shed was 300 square feet,
Courtney, we're trying to allow for sheds, because we got into this trap where the board was not allowing sheds because they were moving closer than the present primary structure.
right,
So
right.
this is a way to allow for a shed between the house and the resource areas. Correct, Jamie?
yep.
Yeah, like in an A zone.
In an A zone, correct.
But not a V-zone.
It could be a B zone also.
Different topic.
Okay.
Different
You only
topic.
want to
That's a
allow a
different-
shed to V-zone?
That's a different topic.
Yeah.
We're just trying to find a way to allow it. But that's where we came up with the 200.
Okay,
We had to pick something, and that's just a good number for a host of reasons. And an important one is what you just said, is because it doesn't require a building permit. We just have to get building on board with the fact, I know that, but we have to get them more aware that when somebody walks up to the counter and says, do I need a permit for a shed? Their answer is no, because you're in the building department. We need to ask them to help us by saying, no, you don't need a building permit, but check down the hall with conservation.
you may need a permit for that, yeah.
May. then it's gonna come to, if we're allowing that, are we doing it under an RDA?
It depends, well, 200 square feet would require, depending on where it is, if it's in Zone A, it would require 600 square feet of mitigation, and we had talked about changing the regs to allow for mitigation under 200 square feet under an RDA. So by that, it would require a notice. If you want to reconsider that, that's something this board can do.
We need to consider that. So,
Yes.
so I heard you, the 200, if it's 200 square feet of mitigation, we're considering doing that under an RDA as
Correct.
opposed to a notice. We should also consider, if we're gonna allow a shed at 200 square feet, that we allow that mitigation 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 under an RDA. Because this is the problem we have and that people have, is having to do a notice for something as simple as a shed.
Okay.
Because when you think about the engineering involved, no diss to any engineers, what it costs to get a plan is more than the shed.
Shed.
So let's try to be,
Realistic?
yeah, I was trying to pick the right word,
Yeah.
I mean, just, you know,
They could
reasonable.
go down to Shed
Yeah,
Ferry,
reasonable.
buy one, and they pop
Problem
it
is
on.
you can't
So-
enforce
The problem with that,
it doesn't
Jamie,
go with the deed that this planting is there, this mitigation is there.
and another issue, from a staff perspective, what we have seen is that we do a shed under an RDA. Okay, let's do shed RDA A zone, 600 square feet. Okay, that property owner in 3 years decides to sell, new property owner comes, that 600 square feet doesn't go in. We don't have a plan that shows where it goes. And then that house is being raised and rebuilt, and they are counting the shed as existing impervious coverage that they want to use towards that. So from a staff perspective, you see where I'm saying, and I know we're getting into the weeds, but these are the real life issues that as staff we're seeing on these plans. So if there's no plan for the shed and the mitigation, then we can't determine if that mitigation actually went in, and therefore, when they're raising and rebuilding and they're counting the shed as existing impervious coverage, you know, now we have to determine whether that mitigation went in or not. So it's putting a little bit more, not that, it's just putting a little bit more research on the staff end, which is fine, if that's what the board wants to do. I'm just giving you real life,
I'm
what's
trying
gonna
to find a middle
happen.
ground because,
I get it.
again, I didn't even think of that, that you're asking an applicant to hire an engineer to tell them where it is, where the mitigation is gonna go, but then they have to also engage the engineer to document that it is. So there's that fee. So again, we just get, you know, you
Yeah.
get $1,000
Wait
shed
a
that
minute,
costs
if you know
$4,000.
the A zone, you must have had a plan, a previous plan, to know where the resource areas are.
Not
So you just have to update a plan, right?
Not necessarily, some properties don't have plans.
Yeah.
Again, I know you wanted to tie the shed thing up, thinking it was a really easy, low-hanging fruit topic, and maybe it's not. So maybe we think about it a little bit more, and I know we don't want to beat sheds to death, but I think it warrants more of a conversation, you know.
You guys go out to every property, even for an RDA, right?
Correct.
So the additional step is you don't go out for an RDA
Compliance,
for compliance.
correct.
So just to follow my line of thinking,
Okay.
we would be asking you to take one extra step, correct me if I'm wrong. If we allowed the shed, if you guys went out and did your inspection and the homeowner said, this is where I can fit my mitigation, and let's just say you agreed with it, you said, yeah, it looks fine. The extra step is for you to go back afterwards and verify.
So that could be done, you would have to write, and I would have to clear that with council, because under the Wetlands Protection Act, basically, again, like we say every meeting, it's just a determination that the regulations don't apply. It's for very small projects that we are allowing homeowners. I was actually speaking to an engineer this afternoon, less than an hour ago, asking us why we require RDAs and flood zones for houses. I said, well, it's the board's way of making it very easy for a resident in a flood zone, not in a buffer, to be able to raise and rebuild. You're still in the commission's jurisdiction, we still need paperwork on it. We're just not gonna make you go through the whole rigmarole of filing a notice if it's in a AE flood zone in the middle of Falmouth Heights. We don't require that. So we're trying to make certain permitting processes easier for the residents. That said, if you want to add a compliance component under your local regs, I don't see why that would be an issue. The problem is that RDAs are not recorded, therefore it's not an encumbrance on the deed, therefore it would be on the staff to track all of these RDAs, which there are hundreds and hundreds a year, and there's no check and balance. Usually, we send somebody off with a notice, maybe in 5 years they ask for compliance, we go out, we check, but a lot of properties, they ask for compliance when they're in the process of selling, because it's an encumbrance on the deed,
Right.
and lending institutions will not write a mortgage out on an encumbered property. So again, it's something that, and I remember the first couple of hearings, we were getting very frustrated talking about sheds again, but it's a little bit more complicated. So I don't think we'll settle it tonight, but it's something that we need to think a little bit more about.
Yeah,
Sorry.
you hit on
Going
a
down
topic
this road
that's
that we're gonna
bothered
talk about.
me for almost as long as I've sat on this commission. And it comes to the issue of, we don't wanna have everybody file a notice of intent so everything gets when it's something small. Yet, the problem is if you require mitigation under an RDA, there's no way to enforce that because it doesn't get recorded with the deed. And that creates a problem later on, potentially. And I would like to see some kind of mechanism where if we're gonna require mitigation even under an RDA, that we require that part of the mitigation be recorded with the deed so it becomes a lien. I don't know whether we
Yeah,
can
and
do
that's-
that legally, but I'm really always been troubled with the idea that, oh yeah, we'll just tell them to throw a few plants in the ground and we have no way of enforcing it.
Which brings us right back to it being a notice. Which
Yeah.
the whole idea of bringing this up was to,
Yeah, no,
Simplify
I
this
agree.
process.
I hate to, if it's a small thing, I hate to put, we're not in the business of being jerks. We're in the business of trying to protect the wetlands, and we want to get to where we are. So it's a real dilemma. I don't know the answer to this.
I'll give you an example, and I'm gonna pick on one of the commissioners, Ron. Ron has said multiple times over the past however many months you've raised some concerns about seeing, plans that sit there and say, oh, we're gonna offer mitigation here, but we're also planting mitigation for an old RDA or an old notice, and you've asked us, well, why wasn't this done? And that brings it to us. So RDAs require plans, as staff just reminded me, RDAs require plans regardless. We would require a plan to show us where the shed is gonna be. The plan is the most, at least we don't get involved in the business dealings of the consulting community, but in our mind, the plan is probably the most costly. And we require plans for RDAs,
Do they have to show wetland resources?
everything.
Oh, well, there you go.
So why,
You rarely see an RDA that does not have a plan attached to it.
Well, then if.
What
if
is
they
the
already have it,
legal-
certifying the resource areas?
Not necessarily, we've always had a policy, or it's always been the staff and the commission stance that we do not confirm resource areas under RDAs, but I mean, if they put a salt marsh on the plan, we look down and there's a salt marsh, we're gonna say, okay, the salt marsh is there. I mean,
What is the legal impediment to recording something like that, even though it's an RDA? If we're gonna say, there's a plan and there's gonna be mitigation, why can't we require that to be recorded?
That is a legal question, and I will have to get back to you, Courtney.
I'm serious, because I think otherwise, most people are gonna go along with the deal. They're fine with it, and they're happy that they don't have to file a notice of intent. And I hate to lay all this on those folks, but there are enough folks who don't look at things that way and are trying to game the system. And unfortunately, we have to have regulations that can have some teeth in them. And if we're gonna require mitigation and we have no way of enforcing it, to me, I think it weakens our own position, actually. It weakens our own authority.
I mean, we brought this to you because, before the board allowed sheds, and then there was a determination by this board that the sheds went against your regulations because we had that it can't move any closer than the present primary structure. Then we were put into a position where we were telling property owners, yes, you have to put your shed beside your house, in front of your house, which is not allowed by zoning. So this is just a way to allow people to have a shed.
So we've really gone too far the other way of what we really were trying to accomplish.
Yes.
What we're really trying to accomplish is simply the fact that we will allow it,
Correct.
period.
Let's allow people to have a
But
shed,
within
the
the
regulations.
standard process.
Yes.
Okay. That was a good way of putting it, thank you. So, and I probably am guilty of complicating it.
You are.
So, I mean, we
So-
don't need to, again, talk this through tonight, but it's something I want this board to think about, and what, do you want to allow them under RDAs? We'll have a plan. It's that mitigation component that, may or may not be.
Right. So what we really should be deciding on is simply the fact that we're gonna allow a shed closer than the present primary structure, period.
With or without mitigation? You're gonna
Well,
need mitigation.
whether it requires mitigation or not, what I'm saying is, we went too far the other way, where the original question, I believe, was simply, can we find a way to allow sheds closer to than a present primary structure? And the answer that I think is yes, we can.
Yeah.
But we're not gonna relax the rules, that it still has to be on
Plan.
a proper plan, and it has to be mitigated for, and that has to be recorded. So, in a manner of speaking, we overstepped our own bounds. So, the real thing we just need to decide is if we're gonna allow a shed closer to a present primary structure. Is your arm gonna fall off, Courtney?
Not yet.
Oh.
This all came about because there was a little tiny lot that was within however close you can be for your lot coverage, 10 feet, 25 feet, a house, whatever. It was a little tiny lot, and the only place they could put a shed
Right.
was there.
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna throw one more curve into this. It could be, you could have a shed closer than the primary structure if there's no other place on the lot to have that shed.
Yeah,
That's
that's subjective.
Yeah,
I think
No.
we just,
no, I get it,
There was another place.
it's a very real problem, but by the same token, you could put yourself in a position where we would be allowing something that we might not think in the end is a good solution.
I think you're gonna see sheds more often on these smaller lots than you
Yeah.
would see on a lot that could, what's the word I'm looking for?
It's still like everything else, we still have to look at it
Thank
under its
you,
own merits.
accommodate a three-car garage, you know?
Right.
So usually you see sheds on smaller lots that can't accommodate a multi-bay garage. That one bay could be used for storage. Again, we can think about it, and we can circle back, let you guys mull it over. We're just bringing up examples of, using the shed as existing coverage, these kind of nuances on the plans, and then when properties change hands, that sort of thing. Just
Courtney?
trying to allow somebody to have a shed.
Yeah, truthfully, I don't have a heart attack about,
Yeah.
the shed, allowing a shed. I think we have to examine it on a case-by-case basis. But what I'm hung up on, and I don't mean to repeat myself, is the issue of mitigation for something under an RDA. And
No,
this is in the,
we're beyond that.
no, I know you're beyond it, but I want a resolution of it. And if we can't enforce mitigation under an RDA, then I hate to make them go to a notice, but to me, that's what we have to do. So we need to get a legal opinion as to whether or not we can. if
Jen
we're
already has that on her list.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Item number 2 from December.
What?
That was from December, right? A
Jim?
recap.
That was a recap from,
Recap
we're
of
still
December.
on
That
December.
was only number one.
That was number 1.
That was number 1 from
Oh.
December.
We got fire pits? Yeah.
No,
Well, no, there was only a couple really meant to discuss today.
okay.
So are we good with sheds for right now?
We'll continue that discussion.
Well, just not about that specifically,
good?
but
I'm good.
the procedure, any of these changes have to go to town meeting, correct?
Once this board decides on
No.
I've got it, Betsy. Once the board decides on changes, we will write them up. We will have more public hearings, even though this is a public hearing. We will have specific public hearings, during our.
Only for that subject?
Only for these
Or
subjects.
subjects. Okay,
Once it goes through the public hearing process, we need to advertise it in the paper. It goes to a 60-day comment period. We have to advertise it for a certain amount of days, and quite frankly, I don't remember the amount of days. I'll have to double check on that. Then we get 60 days for comment period. We need to take the comments back, incorporate them into the regulations if you choose. And then you can promulgate the regulations. In between that time, we would need to go and present these to the select board.
not town meeting.
You only go to
Okay.
town meeting for the law. You're changing the bylaw.
Yeah, that's what I was.
Bylaw
forgot.
says that
So
you have-
what I was getting at was that we kind of talked about having these meetings indefinitely. But at some point, we've got to say, the shed, just for example, the shed is resolved, we have a consensus on that,
Yes.
and we can start that process. We don't necessarily have to wait for everything that we've ever
No.
discussed.
No. And we're internally talking about that. There are things that we have that we can start drafting and bring to you and start the public hearing process.
Okay.
It's similar to what the Board of Health is going through right now. They're looking
Yeah,
at their.
I know you
time.
had told me, and I just,
No, it's okay. They're going through
Oh.
their internal, this is your internal process, even though it has to be a public meeting, because we have a quorum of the board, but this is more like your internal process. We've asked engineers to come.
no, I was just thinking, if we had a hard deadline that we were gonna do these meetings till September 1st,
No, we don't have a hard deadline.
then we could finalize everything.
Yeah.
But that's probably not gonna be the case.
No.
And we should consider keeping this going
Yeah, but I
again
mean, we do,
indefinitely, because there's so many things that come up that need just clarification to
Yeah.
a certain degree. Okay,
okay.
moving on.
Okay. Not a note for discussion tonight, but then we sort of made our way into fire pits and fire pit patios. So you do have in your notes sort of a draft revision put together by Jen that you guys can look at and see if you're in agreement with it, and we can put that on another agenda. The second thing we talked about last time were enclosures in velocity zones, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in this discussion, because I'd like to go through the gathering from last time when Shannon was here, and she kind of gave us an education about how things are changing with the coastal A zone. But I did, Jamie, you were talking about maybe doing like a percentage of what could be an enclosed space, so I did provide a couple examples. Did the best I could trying to figure out square footage, looking at an architectural, I've never done that before. But I gave a couple just as food for thought, and see what you think about them. We had closed the agenda item for long-term monitoring. We're just gonna have them file RDAs to
Are we
keep
all
going on
supposed to have a copy
projects.
of that? Are we all supposed to have a copy?
Yes, sorry.
Those are all yours?
I mean,
Or are
nobody
they-
can look at it, but it's not
Well, no, it's
duplicates.
emailed. I didn't.
Oh,
Oh, you did, do we send them to them, right? Okay.
Everything.
Would you like me to make copies of this so we can read along?
It would,
I will go do that for you right now.
It would be
Alyssa will
helpful.
continue, and I will get you copies.
There's not much left, but we talked about vista pruning last time, but we still needed some more time to have you guys look through the other towns' materials for vista pruning. We talked about that last time. We gave everyone information about other towns' vista pruning regulations. So there was some time for you guys to look through, see what made sense to you, if you'd like to incorporate or change things. We were gonna put that on a future agenda to keep talking about it. We wanted today to really focus on the flood zone information from last time.
can I ask something? Do you have, I mean, I made comments, I read all those,
I know.
and that was months ago. I'm not gonna reread all of them again
Oh.
to make my comments.
Okay.
So did you keep, well, FCTV, we must be able to get a copy from FCTV. But the thing is, these things are so far apart. When I get stuff, I get it, I make my comments, I make the comments at the next meeting.
Yeah.
And then we go off. I mean, I can't remember, well, there were some good ideas from those other towns.
Yep, and again, we didn't get through everything the last time, so that's
Yeah.
what, I'm trying to wrap things up. So we had a couple topics to talk about today to wrap up, potentially wrapping up flood zone, and then the vista, the patios, and the docks I was going to put on the next agenda, so we can try to wrap those up too before we introduce new
Okay.
topics.
But you'll be able to refresh what we've already talked about?
Yeah,
All right.
yep. I didn't go through it all in too much depth,
Okay.
but I can go through that more. We had also talked about that 25-foot offset that we have in our regulations for velocity zones. And I don't know if everyone was able to watch the recording of Shannon's presentation from last month, but we can get into that more and how that plays into that coastal A zone. And then we kind of already touched upon this mitigation requirements under RDAs. We talked about 200 square feet, so Jen put together a draft revision for everyone's review. But if we still want to think about that before we talk about it too much more, we can put that on another agenda. We had brought up outdoor kitchens and velocity zones because you have those vertical walls, and we're putting in sitting walls, pizza ovens, things of that nature. We did not get to developing a draft special condition for that. You guys didn't really think it was prudent to write a regulation, but just sort of tack it on as a special condition. So once we have that written, we'll provide that in a summary for you to review. I had brought up landscape walls that are appearing on properties, and you guys had mentioned that we should just start requiring mitigation for them, so we've already started implementing that, so that's good. We had talked about potentially changing the time frame for grandfathering a dock, and we're still looking into that, so we need to talk to council about it. And then we're gonna be updating the administrative review regulations, since most of that is no longer applicable.
We will make sure we print out our staff notes for everyone
Thank you.
for the next year. We sent them,
Thank you.
you need to print.
Okay, I haven't been doing that, so
Yeah,
that's.
there you go,
okay.
Cory. You're welcome. I think I gave them to you.
Of course.
last week. I'll be right back with those.
Where do we wanna?
Okay, where'd we end up?
Let's do the details. Let's get rid
Oh.
of the 25-foot offset and go with the limb walk.
Okay.
Just make it-
Yeah, this was just a quick refresher. Again, we were trying to see things that we could kind of, for lack of a better term, put to bed, that we could start drafting, so I will work on that. Again, sheds and those things, we will come back to about how you want to permit those. Does everybody have these notes? No, not the ones I just gave you, these ones. They're different. Actually, they're similar.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
Were
So I
those
can just
looking at
run
my
these,
packet?
I can run these through this copier here. So if you want to start from when our gathering was.
We have that.
Oh,
Was that in our pack? Because I haven't seen it.
The pictures were used twice.
She just gave it to you.
no, the pictures were used twice.
Oh, okay.
We were just kind of recapping from that and then adding in a little bit of the
Oh, I see, okay.
Limois. And
I
then
didn't
that
get
was
far
from
enough.
December, this is from January.
Right, so, and what we wanna cover is the setback first, right?
Yes, so let me just print these up for you. I can run them here since you already have the pictures in color.
I just
I have little
picked
notes.
up on a small thing under draft definitions of a fire pit. Up above, it says, it can't be built in, it can be movable, right? And then down below, it says it can be steel or masonry.
Right. Those contradict
Is
it.
a movable masonry fireplace, is that?
Just
I
take the
haven't-
front end loader out and move it.
Huh?
Yeah.
I Googled the definition of fire pit, Courtney.
But that's why we,
have a masonry mold that would be.
I suppose if it's a modular block thing, you can take it apart. If it isn't mortared together, yeah.
I know how much a rock like this weighs.
But it just seemed,
That's,
that seems incongruous, because when I think of masonry, it doesn't move.
well, I think what they're suggesting is we don't create a definition, right?
Okay.
So it would
Yeah.
be on a,
Why did you give me two?
For this very reason, right?
because I did something
right, well, again, that's what it comes down to,
Do me a favor. Collate those.
Okay, these two are
a
the same.
case-by-case basis, so,
All right.
Thank you.
so under item F, it says staff still
I can do
recommends
that.
not creating a regulation or definition. So my question is, we would grant it as a variance then, if we were gonna grant it at all. So it would be on a case-by-case.
We're back on fire pit? Okay. Oh, we're in January, okay. Okay, so,
You have those two?
yeah,
We're on
Are
the
we gonna
setbacks,
start?
right?
Yeah, so in the commission gathering notes, this was just a recap of Shannon's presentation, of Gary Street's contribution, and then sort of our takeaways. So for those who weren't there and who saw in the packets that Jenna just gave you, the newest thing that we're focusing on and have to be aware of is the coastal A zone. Does everyone have a general understanding of what that is, or can I recap it for you?
probably recap it for Courtney, Jamie, and Kevin, because Ron and Betsy were the only ones here.
Okay. So basically, FEMA is introducing a new division of the AE flood zone.
Same thing I have.
Yep,
It's going to be in between the velocity zone and the rest of the AE flood zone. So it's going to be called the coastal A zone. And basically, in this area, they're extending all the velocity zone requirements. So in terms of the building code, any structure in the coastal A zone is going to be required to be up on pilings. So what we are attempting to introduce through all of this logic here is that we should be updating our regulations accordingly, introducing this coastal A zone as a definition, as part of the breakdown of the FEMA flood zones, also incorporating it in all of our provisions that have to do with construction in velocity zones, and just attributing those regulations to this type of flood zone as well. We're recommending not,
I'm gonna jump in here right now. So the state of Massachusetts has issued a draft revision to the Wetlands Protection Act. Specifically, the Wetlands Protection Act, unlike your bylaw, defines land subject to coastal storm flowage, which you see velocity zones in A zones and now coastal A zones. They have a definition only. They are proposing regulations written on land subject to coastal storm flowage. Those regulations are currently, I think the draft is almost 2 years old, and it hasn't had any movement. The draft regulations on the state are going to require, as the building code, that if so as Alyssa just stated, the current the next edition building code, Jamie, if you're in a coastal A zone, you're going to need to build to V zone standards. The state is taking it one step further and saying that structures in a coastal A zone, proposed regulations, they have not been promulgated, shall be on open pilings only. And there's a lot of other nuances in there. You know, you can't increase the footprint, all of that. What we're saying or recommending is, because we don't know when and if those state regulations will ever be in effect, is that since this town has always been proactive with your 25-foot offset, and we'll get to that, that we are recommending that and there's not a whole lot of places in town, but there are, that if a structure falls within this coastal A zone, then you should, the staff is recommending you build it to our current V zone standards on open pilings, small enclosure, that. Because it basically goes from a 3-foot wave height to between a 1.5 and 3-foot wave height. So you're going from V zone to coastal A zone, and the coastal A zone isn't everywhere, to an A zone. So you're going 3-foot and greater wave height, 1.5 foot to 3-foot wave height, which could cause some damage, to 1.5 foot wave height.
And those are the state proposed, that you said are
The state has written regulations on land subject to coastal storm flowage, which talks about A zone standards, V zone standards, and this new coastal A zone standard. It's anybody's guess when and if those regulations will ever be adopted.
But we can have our own regulations. We can throw out the 25-foot and adopt this Limwa instead.
And that is what Shannon from the county had recommended.
so, right, so if we ditch the 25-foot, adopt this, we would be ahead of whatever the state comes up with.
Correct.
So if and when they enact that, we'd already be there.
Correct.
and we'd be in alignment with building code, which would be important.
Okay,
I mean, it makes sense.
yeah.
I mean,
I'm just trying to follow because, you know, the whole thing is confusing me is about, you know, all these state regulations that have been in the works for 5 years and probably for the next 5 years.
Technically, they've been in the works for, I've been hearing about these
I'm
states
not splitting
for
hairs. I'm just
25
honest.
years.
All right.
But that's exactly, Jamie.
but I mean, that's why we had, you remember, people arguing, well, your 25-foot zone only has to do with the width of the pencil, that's why it was put.
Yeah,
And I'm like, no, it makes sense. I said, a wave doesn't come in, and this is why, it was Mike Borsella, he said, what are you talking about, the Colgate Shield? He's not old enough to remember, you guys are old enough, there used to be an ad. If you had Colgate,
Yeah,
if you brushed with Colgate, it had a shield and you could knock on it, right?
Right,
Well, there's no shield.
right.
And so it makes sense that if it's a flat area, the waves are gonna go in.
Yeah.
Well, that's what this limb law incorporates.
No, and I think this is a far more rational,
Right, than an arbitrary 25
than an
foot.
arbitrary 25 feet. Because I'm inclined to think that to your point, the arbitrary 25 feet was a translation of a pencil mark. I mean,
Well, it may have been, but it
May have
made sense.
yeah, but that was the initial reason
Yeah. Well,
that we put them in.
we don't have
This
any
has
idea
much
what the
more-
original reason was.
And
Yeah,
that's what
but this has much more
Just because
rational.
there was a conspiracy theory that said that that's why we had it, doesn't mean
it was
that was the
true.
reason.
Well,
It
it doesn't
doesn't
matter
matter
whether
what
it was
the
a
reason.
conspiracy
Yeah.
theory. It made sense
Yeah.
from our standpoint, and I think this makes more sense. So I would agree.
Yeah.
Let's replace the 25-foot offset with this.
Limb wall. And besides which, anybody building has to do it with the building code, right?
Yeah, so it makes sense to get them on.
Yeah.
And that's what Shannon said is, it's the same goal, this is
Right.
just far more accurate.
Right.
And it doesn't
So we-
apply
yes.
to every property, there are distinct properties, and I gave you guys the links if you wanna check on those and kind of see what it is.
And our engineers are already putting limb laws on the,
We're asking for
Right.
yeah,
it, because some properties are changing drastically.
yeah.
Yeah.
Even if
And-
1 square foot
Clear
is
view.
in the coastal
Yeah.
A zone, according to Shannon, the whole house goes up a mile.
Wow.
Instead of
And
25.
and the new maps are far more
Yes,
precise.
yep,
And we also have certain engineers that have told us that even though, and Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, you have until June 30th to build under the 9th or the 10th edition, or the 10th or 11th, I'm not quite sure.
Yep.
We have certain engineers that have already told us that they are really recommending to their clients to build under the new building code, which takes these
Yeah, that-
coastal A zones into
That's usually
account.
the way it is, but, you know, to the state's credit, I mean, they just give you that overlay so that, because not everybody's ready, you
Yeah,
know.
and
it's-
we understand.
It's like you said, like these regulation changes they're talking about, been talking about it for so long, that we've all like kind of ignored it because we know if it ever gonna come to be. All of a sudden it comes to be. So now they're giving you the latitude. But oftentimes the new process is really, it's more beneficial to the,
And
to
that's,
the owners.
and that's what the engineers are telling them, and as
So
Alyssa
for
said.
this, for us, it's really simple. We want to just adopt this and abandon the 25, and then we're up to speed, and, well, unless they change it, but,
No, I agree.
so that's kind of simple. And I have to say, I want to say it on record that, you know, I appreciate that Shannon came and did that presentation. I was really disappointed that I couldn't make it, but I didn't want to share the plate with all of you. Well,
Thank you.
Well, some of
Maybe
it.
Thank you,
some of
we
you, but-
appreciate that.
But I did,
Not you.
I did watch the recording, and then Shannon, you shared the PowerPoint.
Yes.
So that was really helpful, so Shannon, thank you. And it just simplified everything.
Yeah,
I mean, because it's,
absolutely.
you know, it can be overwhelming when people, some of these people read this, but I know, like, I guess I shouldn't say names, but one of the engineers pointed out to me that, you know, they're moving forward with that in mind, because it's just easier in the long run. And I have talked to a bunch of builders that are just, you know, they're just going with the new code right out of the gate. And I know in my experience, you know, where I work, we always did that. We just-
So our regulations need to come up to speed with the new code.
Yeah,
Okay, we'll work on that for you.
There will also be updating for the AE flood zone, they've raised it another foot above base flood elevation, so we'll keep that as well.
As well as these.
The building
That's up to
code,
3 feet now.
Yeah.
the
So we have
building code
to
has, so we have. to-
Yeah, so we have to tweak our
3
regs
feet now,
on
I think, too.
base flood.
Yeah.
Were we not 2 feet above the base? Where's the regs were?
it was one, now it's two.
No, it's 3 in the other one.
Yeah.
There's a 3 foot in there somewhere.
But I think wasn't the building
It's 3 feet.
1
somewhere.
and now it's 2?
Well, FEMA's one, and then we always added.
But we
one.
were 2,
Now we're adding two, so it's
so are
three.
we gonna go to 3?
Well,
Yeah,
it's three total.
Yeah.
So it's FEMA's one, and us, we used to be one mass, and then it's changed in the new code to two, so it's
Yeah.
total of three.
So AE was, old code was 1 foot above base flood, new code is 2 feet above base flood, correct, Jamie? Yes,
Yes.
yeah, and then V zone was 2 feet of base flood, and the new code is 3 feet of base flood.
Right.
And our regulations have us at 2, so our regulations need to catch up with the new building code. Who wrote that, Jamie?
Do we want to exceed that? I mean, originally, we exceeded it. In other words, the building code was 1, we were 2.
Yeah, and if, Courtney, if we go to 4 in a V zone, that's really, I think, from and correct, I'm gonna defer to you and to Jamie.
I think you're gonna have consistency with it.
I mean, we're gonna start, people are gonna start butting up against the height restriction in zoning. So what I like to tell people is we're always pushing you up and zoning's pushing you down, and so
But that's
people-
something ZBA's working on, changing their regulations.
All right.
I read that recently, that because of this,
Yeah,
yeah,
people are getting kind of squished between COMCOM and ZBA. So I don't know what ZBA is doing, thank you for letting
I
us.
don't know if it's ZBA or planning, I think it's ZBA.
Okay, I can check with ZBA and we'll make a note to check with ZBA.
Yeah, talking about that.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they have to think about it, because
Yeah,
it's, you know,
we
if you have to follow FEMA, you're kind of forcing people to do something that, you know, and it's so unusual, because when you go down Surf Drive and there's houses that are on grade, and then just to be out of the flood, you know, some of them are 15 feet up. So that's an extreme, you know, and then still to maintain the 35 feet.
You got 18 feet in height to work with. That'd be tough.
Low
So,
ceilings.
what's the goal? I mean, are we trying to make it as desirable as possible for people to live on stilts and, in a zone? I mean,
Well, this is the
frankly, we should be discouraging
This is the
people.
trickle down, because, you know, the basic premise was simply to get people out of the floodplain, which sounds simple enough,
Right,
but then you create other problems because of the height.
so it's a trade-off, life's a trade-off. So if they just can't go as tall in their building. I mean, I don't have that doesn't trouble me at all. I understand from the standpoint of somebody wanting to build a house on the ocean, they wanna, if you're forced to go higher to base elevation, yes, and one rationale is it makes sense to raise the elevation of the house. But now, does that mean that you can raise the elevation of every house all over town? Or do you can say only in a V zone? In my mind, we do what we want, and if we wanna make it 4 feet, or whatever the number we feel comfortable and appropriate, that's fine. And if that means that they can't build as tall a house because of 35-foot regulations, that's too bad. They have a choice, they don't have to build there.
Jim?
I mean, I don't mean to sound like a
Curmudgeon.
do.
Curmudgeon, but you do.
curmudgeon, but I am.
All right, moving on.
While Courtney makes a good argument from a staff perspective, over the years, our 25-foot offset has been problematic as it has not matched up with the building code. So I would recommend we stick with the building code, 3 and 2, with FEMA 3 and 2, so that we are not at odds, and when we're
Yeah, it makes
reviewing
more
building
sense.
That
permits,
makes
something
sense.
that's 3
Makes
feet.
much more sense.
I understand what you're saying, Courtney, and from, a coastal resiliency standpoint, I agree with you. But from a regulatory and practical, when we're implementing these regulations, it would be much fairer to the residents if we all were in a line.
We need to be on the same page.
Correct.
Yeah, we can't, things are complicated enough without, being different from one end of the building to the other.
Yeah.
That's just not practical.
It has caused some issues over the years with the 25-foot offset, so I'm pleased to see the board is open to removing that and adopting, V-zone standards in a coastal A-zone. I think it makes much more sense. And that's all I have to say on that.
I don't disagree with that. I mean, being consistent with all the codes across the board is good. But that doesn't change my point. I don't think zoning has to increase the height of their buildings to accommodate a few people that wanna
We're not
build on
zoning,
stilts.
but
We're not
zoning
zoning.
make their decisions.
Courtney, you
Yeah.
can attend a public meeting at zoning and express your thoughts,
I might
okay?
All right.
get
Well,
on their enemies list.
Just the last couple of points, if we are to update the regs to include V-zone standards for all coastal A
Sorry.
zones, if we're going through the process of updating the regs to include all coastal A zones with the same velocity zone standards and requirements that we have, we would recommend not attributing that to dock regulations just yet. Once you're able to view the maps through the links, you'll notice there is a lot of the finger ponds that are going to be impacted. We haven't done the math and calculated it yet, but, I mean, over there, it'd almost be like a moratorium on docks, with nothing else would be allowed.
So you're saying
It might be too drastic right now.
with the docks,
Okay.
you're not saying if it's a coastal A zone, they can't do anything.
Not
You're
yet.
saying
Not
if
at
it's
this time.
in the V zone,
Yeah.
it's the V
We
zone.
need to look into it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Staff
that's
may-
fine.
Yeah, as Alyssa said, a lot of these coastal A-zone lines are sitting right on. We just need to do the calculation of how many properties would be impacted, and it'll be, once we took a closer look at these maps. At this time, I think requiring docks, not, doing a prohibition of docks in a coastal A-zone is not what we are recommending at this time, only because we need to do more research on it
Yeah. I mean,
before we
those
can make
finger-
it clear
That's true.
and,
Those finger ponds have the,
correct.
when there's a big storm, basically stuff funnels up those. So the limb wall would be,
It's
I mean,
pretty
totally
high.
appropriate, right?
Yeah.
For a house. But I agree. I think you're on the right.
Again, at this time, we will caveat that our recommendation may change with more research, but again, we're strictly talking about house construction.
Okay.
One of the last points that Shannon discussed is that in accordance with building code, there are some changes that are being made. So new construction, like brand new on an undeveloped lot, or substantially improved structures, so maybe like a raise and rebuild situation. If they're in a dune, we don't have a lot of houses in dunes right now, but if they are in a dune and they are rebuilt up on piles, they are not allowed to have an enclosed space. So it
Any enclosed space at all?
Any
if you're in a
enclosed-
dune, it impedes the migration of the dune, is what she described. So we might
I
need to.
remember cases that we
So you
had
have-
this discussion.
So it can only be accessible with an outdoor staircase or something.
Correct.
Yeah.
There aren't many cases like that in town. I
No,
can
but there are at
think
least two
of,
places
there
in
are
town.
2 places that this would have impacted greatly had it been into effect at that
Yep.
time. But that's FEMA.
Mhm.
So just something we should have written in there. Like I said, it won't impact too many areas, but to be consistent,
Yep.
we should include that.
Oh, we've always brought that up in meetings,
Correct.
that the dune has to have room to migrate.
Yeah. There was another point about no new construction seaward of high tide, and we talked about some historic structures that are exempt. That probably won't apply to us much, but just to be consistent, I think it should also be added in there.
You know, let me ask a question about this. There's only one property that well, actually, 2 properties that I remember. One was in Bourne Pond, and it was old, do you remember this one? Do you remember this? It was
Where?
in Bourne Pond. It was an old, like, fishing house that was rebuilt. It's partially in the pond now. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Mhm.
But I don't think we have that many. I mean,
I'll show you what she's talking about. It was years.
I mean, it hasn't, this is years ago
Okay.
that they
I vaguely remember
rebuilt,
this,
and we allowed it because it was
Before Jamie.
a rebuild.
Oh,
Yeah.
this is a structure in West Falmouth Harbor
No,
that,
I know exactly which structure Betsy's thinking.
Oh, you're talking about the boathouse.
looks like a boathouse,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was a boathouse. That used to be deep enough that a boat was pulled into it.
Yeah.
Of course, now it's not.
And then there's one across the street, it's
We're gonna have.
landbound.
Yeah, and one out at, on Penzance Point,
Yeah.
there's a boathouse like that.
Okay. So if you go back, we'll go on and then I can jump in.
Yeah, so that kind of recaps what Shannon was discussing at the last gathering here. So we've kind of already talked about eliminating that 25-foot offset. The other outstanding V-zone topic that we had on the agenda was talking about that enclosed space. So we've already covered in a dune, there can never be an enclosed space. You guys had talked about maybe limiting that to a square footage or a percentage and actually defining that and putting that in the regulations. Like I said before, I did put together some examples. I don't know if you've had time to review them, so we can always come back to that another day.
So if you look at your staff notes from December, page 2 under 2C, Alyssa gave us a couple of different examples of houses.
Which one, I'm sorry, what line item?
We're going regulation review meeting, the December 19th meeting, Jay.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you go to page 2, page 2, 2C, we gave you some real-world examples
Oh, all right.
from your, from some of the last 5 or so years of,
The ones I can
Things,
remember.
yeah,
that I could
about,
easily picture that were
yeah.
square.
you know, what the square footage of the structure was, what the
Yep.
enclosure square footage was, what that percentage of enclosed space to building footprint was. So if you'll review that, we can talk about enclosures at the next meeting.
Because Jamie, what percentage
mean,
were you
we're almost
thinking?
done.
I know that was,
Are we almost done?
I think, I don't know.
Why are we almost done?
Are we almost done?
No,
No.
no.
What?
It was wishful thinking on my part.
Okay. No, you're 3:30 to 5:30, not 3:30 to 4:30. It takes us an hour to recap after the last meeting, so.
We have new topics we're gonna
We have new topics.
How exciting.
So so we go anywhere from 15% to 43% to 11% to 13%. It's all over the map. Basically, what we're finding out is the larger properties, the percentage is smaller. For the smaller properties,
Right.
the percentage is larger.
Because we had always started at 200,
Correct.
and that's the debate. Do we want to stay with a square footage of 200 or
A percentage of the overall
4%
footprint of the
overall?
structure.
Because typically, the bigger the house footprint needs a bigger footprint of
Why?
proportion.
utility.
But then you've
Utilities
also
aren't
come,
there.
you've also come across not only,
Utilities aren't there, utilities
No.
have to be up.
Jamie's talking about the elevator, correct?
Yeah, well, yes, the elevator, the higher the house goes, the more stairs are required.
Yep.
Which takes up a bigger footprint, so that there's that to consider too.
There's also consideration that this board has done recently where you're allowing an enclosed space for storage. I mean, granted, we have, realistically, someone cannot store their patio furniture on the roof. So, I mean, this board has, recently allowed not only the enclosed space for a small mudroom, a staircase, an elevator if be, but also a space for storage of bicycles, patio furniture, kayaks.
Right, and that's how this whole thing started.
Correct.
May I make a comment? This is a social comment. I hate using percentages because the person who has a lot gets a lot.
Gets it.
Yes.
And mine's based on salary. So you're in a place where say,
Right.
I might be, in the old days, I might be getting 50,000, you might be getting 100,000, and it's a 10% increase. So you get 10,000 more, I get 5,000 more. Why is that fair? I hate percentages.
Well, that's why we're having the debate. So,
Yeah.
okay, so with what you're saying, that's fine. We've always used 200 as a base. So I really don't mean to turn my back on that.
I can hear you.
So the question is, do we want to stick with 200? Should we
Well, we know
increase?
200 isn't enough.
Right.
It's not enough for a staircase and an
Preach
elevator.
it to the choir, that's what we just said.
Yeah,
200's not enough.
Okay, so that's why I'm guilty that I said, should it, would it be easier to come up with a percentage?
Yeah.
You don't agree with that, that's fine. Then what do we come up with for square footage, if we want to go that route? So, I mean, we have to debate both of it, but we need to decide if it's going to be a square foot, and then, or a percentage. Courtney, put your hand down, I'll call on you when I'm done.
Okay.
So, if it's gonna be a square foot, what is that square footage gonna be? Courtney?
So, if we decide what, if we want to go with allowing enclosed space on an elevated structure, I'm just throwing out some things to be considered. The purpose, I would assume, is, this has always been the assumption, that you want room to put a staircase in, and if possibly you want room for an elevator. So, in a normal course of things, how much space does that take up? Now, what determines how much space that takes up is how much of the house is elevated. Because if you gotta go up 13 feet as opposed to 8, you're gonna have to build a more extensive stairway that's gonna take up more room. That's a dilemma. But like Betsy, I am far more inclined to look at a square foot number, and because I think otherwise somebody comes in and wants to build a 8,000 square foot house, and you say they can have 15% enclosed.
yeah.
Right, they're gonna have a big closed room.
Yeah. And perhaps
So that's
what we
fine.
need
So
to
we-
do
So we stick with square footage instead of
is to
percentage?
is to find a sympathetic architect who can come in and say, okay, this is how much space you need to build a code compliant stairway that's X number of feet. And allowing for, when you open the door, say 4 feet before the stair run, and that kind of stuff, and come up with something like that, and say that's how many square feet we're allowing. I'd be far more inclined to do that than to do a percentage.
So then what we need to do, we need to figure out what the average stairway is gonna be, the average elevator, what we're gonna allow for storage.
Yeah, exactly.
So storage, I think, would be the easiest thing to tackle before we do enclosures.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
I said storage might be the easiest thing to tackle, since we just allowed, sheds cannot exceed 200 square feet, so the board can go anywhere from 100 square feet, which would be a 10 by 10 enclosure for outdoor equipment, up to 200 feet. And that would just be your storage area. And now you have to go enclosed space.
Yeah, I don't think we need a sympathetic architect. Certainly, these must be in the building.
Yeah.
The building department must have plans for all these things that we've already permitted. Right?
When you first started saying that, what I was getting out of it was that you were saying we're allowing a 200 square foot shed, so we should start with 200 square feet for storage in this enclosed area. Hold on.
Okay.
Then add the stairway and
That is what you
an
said.
elevator. But I'm not sure that's what you're actually saying. You're actually saying there should be a separate storage area, a separate shed.
No, I'm just saying, the board can break it out, because we have one example. Moses Road has 2 different areas. They have their enclosure to access the structure, and then they have an enclosure for storage. You can combine that. you can separate that. But I think
For
the
the
easy,
total footage.
for a total
Total
square
footage.
footage.
Yeah. Right, but we're still right back to what would that square footage be?
Correct.
So, again, what I got out of you're saying we would say 200 square feet for storage. So just hold on to that for a second. So 200 is our starting point. Then an elevator is X. So to throw a number, just say it's 50 feet. Stairway's gonna be different because, again, the higher you go, the longer the run. You can only go 11 feet without breaking that stairway up by the building code. Meaning instead of having a straight run of stairway that's 3 feet by 11 feet, it is now gonna be 6 feet by 10 feet because you have to add a landing.
Can't we just come up and say if it's,
What?
if it's not that high, you don't have to break it with a landing, you have that many square feet for it. If it's bigger, you can have more square feet.
Well, it's almost like we've gotta figure the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Almost.
But everybody gets the worst case scenario? I mean, if you're not gonna go up that high, you don't need all that extra space.
Yeah, but why would you take the extra space?
Say that again?
Why would you take the extra space?
He wants to give a maximum amount. I want to give
The minimum.
two values.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
I mean, you can make it a sliding scale, obviously, because if they're only gonna go up 8 feet, they don't need as big a stairway run and all that as somebody
You guys
going
can
up
figure that
13.
out.
But,
So,
Yeah.
do we, that becomes a,
So now we're right back to this, where we are, where we're just figuring out on every project.
Yeah.
let me give you an example. So 9 Sycamore, it's a very small lot. We allowed 200, so the total footprint of the structure was 630 square feet. We allowed 270 square feet enclosure, which is 43% of the property. 43% of this thing. If we add, and I just threw that out for storage, because we've been talking about storage lately. If we added 200 square feet for storage, which is a lot, we may want to reduce that in a B zone, you're talking almost at 80% of that footprint of that
That's
property was going to be
ridiculous.
enclosed.
You may as well have
Breakaway panels. You're almost enclosing the entire space. So
Exactly.
as much as I understand you don't like percentages,
Yeah.
as Alyssa said, proportionally, that might be the way to go. But I'm gonna give it to my two builders here.
But if you did the 15% on that 630, you're giving them like 75 square feet of space.
Right, it's not enough.
That's not enough.
And that's not enough to build an average stairway
let alone
and
anything else.
elevator, or anything else. So that's the problem, so that's where,
Why don't you say you can have a stairway, you can have a elevator, depending on somebody's not gonna come in with an elevator for 10 people, right?
well, or we say, it's square footage, and they can use it for whatever they choose. So maybe they have an elevator in lieu of a storage shed. It's not for us to say what it's gonna be used for, but if we come up with, but it's the same principle. If we say 200 square feet, you use it for the stairway, you use it for an elevator, you use it for storage, whatever you want. You can use a ladder to get to your, well, you can't legally, but,
I don't know. I don't know if it's something that Jamie and Courtney, you want to fiddle with on some paper and see what you can come up with. As much as, again, Betsy, I think percentage-wise, it might be better. I
For
don't
an
know that.
8,000 square foot house, to have 43%,
Yeah,
that's
that-
ridiculous.
the impact.
Absolutely, and
the
that, but I'm not
impact, yes,
saying
I agree with you.
43%. I'm not saying 43%. I'm just saying that's
Well,
what.
these people only had a 270, which is a modest,
Correct.
so why should the 8,000
Okay.
have more than 270? Just because they happen to have a,
Unfortunately, we did
Big
ask Shannon if any other towns, so we could try to get some sort of you know. that's what I'm looking for.
Maybe the way around
Hi,
this.
Lori.
By Laura. Just kind of like to compare to other towns, but we are the only town on the Cape that is currently requiring open piling. So she was very pleased at that, because I was like, oh, could you give me some other town examples? She goes, yes, I can. Falmouth.
And she did,
We're the only ones, what?
That require open pilings and only allow for small enclosed space.
Maybe the way,
Because we were following the building code.
maybe the way around this is to, again, rather than trying to nail it down, we say, what is the purpose of this enclosed space?
I mean,
It's
you
not-
want a
No,
minimum,
no,
you
no,
want a minimum
let
amount
me,
in the
follow
B
me
zone.
through.
Yeah.
What's the purpose of this enclosed space? The purpose is to have a stairway that meets code that allows access to the second floor. We need 3 or 4 feet of landing at the bottom of the stairs before you exit. So you allow that. We will allow an elevator whose maximum interior dimensions are X plus Y.
Right.
And we will allow room for 1 coat closet or something. And that all of these things must be according to the code. So the code determines, like the rise
How
and
big,
run.
how big any of them are.
Yeah, and then you.
And that's what you're allowed.
And then you say, okay, put all the pieces together, and that's how much you're allowed.
You could also do, as Lily just said, we could do something like 200 square feet, or blank percent, whichever is greater, whichever is lower, something like that. So
But it's,
it gives a,
I like Courtney's suggestion.
yeah, what I'm trying to get to
What do you
is,
need? You want the
what's the
minimum amount?
function
Don't
of the
interrupt.
closed space? And if you're saying you are allowing a stairway to meet, that meets code, and you can say that you can dictate that the stairway can be no more than 4 feet wide, because by code, it has to be 3 feet. But more oftentimes, you have entranceway staircases that are like 4 feet wide. So I can see allowing a staircase that's 4 feet wide that meets code, to allow for an elevator that does not exceed X plus Y square feet, and a place for a landing
And 100
that
square feet.
meets code. In other
100
words,
square feet for
typically,
storage.
you have to have like 3 feet between the last step down to the ground and the entranceway. Am I correct, Jamie? I don't know whether it's 3 feet or 4 feet, but you have to allow for certain landing area. So if you say you have to allow for this, you have to be at the stair, then let the architect come in with a design. We look at the plan and say, okay, bing. We can even take it over to the building department and say, does this design meet code? And if it meets the code, then that's what we allow. In other words, what is,
code allows you to enclose the entire structure with breakaway panels.
no. Talking about, is the stairway constructed to meet code by this plan? Not what does it allow. I'm saying, what are the elements that we want to allow being closed, rather than taking a percentage or a sign? You're gonna have to have a stairway. You're gonna have to have a landing area. Those have to meet code. If you want to put an elevator in, the elevator probably has a minimum size, right? So, and that's what determines the size of the enclosed space. And that's gonna vary with how far it's elevated off the ground. But at least you've got a formula for determining this.
Yeah, but-
And when we have a project like that come in front of us, we have to see an architectural set of plans that meets the code. And then we can,
And it takes in,
That hasn't been the problem. The problem's been the storage.
so we'll give X number of feet
now,
of storage.
that we can say is square footage.
And
Now, the other
100 square
thing is,
feet, 150, 200.
suppose
That's what I was saying earlier, what Jen was saying was that, do we say it's the utilities plus the 200 square feet of storage that we would have otherwise allowed?
Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
yeah, and like you said, does it all have to be together, or can these be two separate spaces?
And I'm not
Yeah.
saying 200 square feet is storage on every property, I just threw that out because we were talking about sheds and storage. That's all. I mean, we could do 100 square feet of storage in a
Well,
B
that's what I
zone.
say, 100,
Yeah,
150,
whatever.
200.
So,
Yeah.
and just on that point,
But you have to allow the 200 minimum to be fair with what you allow for everybody else.
Not necessarily. You're in a velocity zone, you're in a completely different area, you're in a high hazard area, you're subject to a 3-foot or greater wave height. You are not like everybody else. You're in a much more,
so you
I don't
leave
want to
it.
say dangerous, but
All good.
hazardous area.
So you put a formula in there
And all
for the
these
amount of
examples
area
are
allowed
these
for
on-
closed
All those
storage
examples are,
based on the zone, the flood zones.
those are all
It's the only place
examples, we can come up with
require
more of them.
people to go up on
Well,
stilts.
Nemasket Road,
Say that again?
that's
It's
brand
the only
new,
place
right?
where people
Mhm.
They
have to
just
go up
had
on
it.
stilts.
I asked these questions
Yeah, right.
to the architect and engineer during the meeting.
Yep,
And there was well over 3, and he really didn't have the answer. He was supposed to get back to me. I wasn't there at the next meeting, whether he'd get back to us or not. But 2 months ago, we said 200 square feet was enough minimum amount for an elevator and a stairs. And then plus whatever we were gonna allow them. 150 square feet for storage. Nemasket meets that.
Yeah, he did come back.
Mascot came back
They
at
did the
293.
290 for the elevator and the
293.
stairs?
Elevator, stairs,
Stairs and
and 2 little
storage.
Right,
closets.
all right, so it's 328 here, so 290, so he even cut it back a little.
Yeah.
And that's, again, that's a new example of a
Yeah.
house that's just going up. So I think we're in the ballpark with that, with that example.
Yeah,
That example was not the one that recently came before us, that was the prior one, the one that recently came before us with Tim and Tom Lee.
Yeah, a little
with the
bit more than
pool.
328.
That ended up at 293, I just wrote that order.
Okay.
yeah, that's what they did.
Because that's confusing, because those two houses are right across the
They're right
street.
They're right across the street.
Jamie, I have a question for you. Is there a minimum size of a residential elevator?
Code-wise,
Yeah.
I don't believe so.
I mean,
But we wouldn't
So
want
it
to put
could
a
be-
minimum elevator in
it
for
could-
one person with a family that's gonna access from the ground to their first floor house. We wouldn't want to put a little, a one-person thing where you push a button or a driveway or a wellway or whatever.
well, I
Right,
mean,
and
what
a
I'm
lot of
getting,
manufacturers aren't going to,
Yeah.
they're gonna have minimum restrictions because of how they have to build it.
What size is that elevator?
well, I guess that's a commercial.
That's
You
probably.
know, it'd be
8 by
interesting
8.
to,
Yeah.
what are the dimensions of a normal residential
Yeah,
elevator? I mean, I've only been involved in putting one in, and if I remember it was like 3.5 or 4 by 4.
No, I think there are different sizes. I mean, I think something like a 7 by 7, 8 by 8 is probably pretty standard.
for residential?
It'd be worth checking on, you know.
Yeah, so a couple of my houses that I take care of have elevators, and I would say they're on the small side, and they're probably 6 by 6. But I also think you're gonna get a different elevator external than internal. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So an elevator that's gonna be built into a shaft for exterior exposure, like what we're talking about, is probably gonna be a little bit bigger, because everything has to be self-contained in that shaft. So if you have, where if it's internal like this, it's built with, I mean, this is still built within a shaft, and it's probably a cement block shaft, but it's an interior based, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since, I did one elevator, and it actually went into this kind of a thing. But it was all within conditioned space. So basically, the only thing was, it was a frame wall, a normal frame wall with some, then there were, I think it's a double layer of 5/8 sheetrock
Right.
inside. And then the box, and it was like 3 or 4 inches
Right.
between the double layer sheetrock and the car.
But that's where we split hairs, because is this dimension internal or external? Because in this case, they would have to be in a concrete shaft.
Would
It
they, I
has to be
mean,
fireproof and it has to be
wouldn't
weatherproof.
this, I mean, I'm assuming that
No,
if
less
we
than 20.
enclose a stairway, that's gonna be conditioned space, is it not?
Yeah, you enclose a stairway, it's, the only thing, I believe the only thing in the building code, correct me if I'm wrong, Jamie, is the only thing that is not breakaway panels is the elevator shaft. Everything else is breakaway panels.
Even in,
So it's
even
not
where the
hermetically
stairway
Well-
is?
Even where the stairway is.
A stairway doesn't have to be enclosed. An external stairway does not have to be enclosed by code. They don't have to be.
Okay, so I
We're
was under
saying that
I was under a
we would want
misconception.
people to have them enclosed because they're going into their house. I mean,
Yeah, and especially when there's ice and snow and,
right, it just, that's where common sense has to come into play. But technically, it doesn't have to be enclosed. But an elevator is different because it's a mechanical system.
Yeah.
we don't have to get this answer right now.
No, we don't.
No, I think we're dealing conceptual, so
Yeah.
we can just find out if it's good. We can dimension, we can talk to a couple of architects and get that.
I'll make a call to the company that we use and
Thank
see
you,
if
Jamie.
I can get an
Is it-
average.
Thank you.
or-
It's associated, isn't it an associated elevator or
Well,
something?
it's one.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I'm just trying to get the concept down, and I think it's more, what fits in the space that meets code, and that's the
The
size.
minimum amount of
Yeah,
enclosed space.
I personally just think it's to be easier if we come up with either a square footage or a percentage. I just think,
Well, the problem is,
Well,
again,
like you say, if it's a 8-foot rise versus a 16-foot rise,
you can have a
so
bigger
just
stair.
say, yeah, these are the elements, how many square feet? And if somebody comes in with a very fancy staircase, we'll say no.
Yeah,
I mean, it takes up.
I mean,
3
it's
times
their
as much.
application process, they still have to come in and we have to
keep in
approve
mind
it.
the code implications, like I said, because the higher the stairway, the more rest,
Right, which is fine,
you know.
And that's gonna take more space.
yeah, which is fine.
And
Okay.
you very likely, to your point, you've gotta go up a certain number of feet. You've gotta put a landing in it halfway up and break it. Well, that's fine. So now that gives that person an option to put a closet underneath.
Guys,
But
I just
honestly,
have to go grab some water.
Even in a standard residential stairway, if it's your main entry, you probably wanna have a landing anyway.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's, you're coming in, if it's your main entry, you just don't want it to be a hall, of one straight run, so.
I just think if you're coming in and you're soaking wet and you're covered with ice and snow, so you need a place
And
before you
if they
go up.
have a landing, they can put storage underneath it.
Yeah, I mean, a stairway, no matter how it's built, you can take advantage of the space underneath.
Right. That's why I think, rather than dealing with percentages or a fixed square foot, I think we take, based on the, I
You
think
said
part of
that,
it is
you
we
said that.
require
We got it,
architecture.
we got it, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's a debate we have to have. Well, but not today. All right, so what's the next?
So the third topic
Elevator and
is-
pilings?
Yeah, that's kind of a new topic that Jim wanted to discuss, but it has to do with the velocity zone
Well,
information.
that's kind of dictated by
Our code is,
What's the topic?
when to
Jen-
require a house to
House
be
on
elevated
the
on
elevator.
pilings.
So this came about because of a recent project you had on Fort Pocasset, where the house was 15 feet away from an eroding coastal bank. And it was a small house, it had a deck and a shed. And what they did is they enclosed the deck and they took the shed, they made the shed go away and they used that square footage. And so basically, they ended up under that 200 square feet in your velocity zone regs, which you would allow without having the building be raised on pilings. You were gonna start to see more and more
More
of
of
these
this.
types of projects. And Courtney was chairing that night. Jamie, I know you have the plan, but we can send it to you again.
Yeah, we
Yes,
went
it
there.
was allowed under the regulations,
Yeah.
but as we stated in the hearing, it wasn't a very smart move. We did talk to the building commissioner, and Ron, I know you had a question about this. Courtney wanted to see that addition on pilings.
Yeah,
And the building commissioner did agree that he was not gonna allow that frost wall, that addition needed to be on small pilings. And when I say pilings, Jamie,
But not elevated.
sonotubes,
it
yeah.
wasn't elevated.
Yeah.
This structure was
Whatever.
literally
Sonotubes.
15 feet from that salt marsh. And it just raised some red flags to me
Well,
that
more importantly would be the height of the flood zone, no?
it's in a V zone.
A V-zone?
It was in a V zone.
No, I
Was it-
understand that,
Was it,
but
I'm trying to remember now, was it less than 200 square feet?
Yeah, it was right at 200, because they enclosed the deck. So it just caused me pause, and it was one of these examples that I wanted to bring up to the board that said, yes, it met your regulations, but if we really do want to start making these properties a little bit more resilient to sea level rise, then we may want to rethink that 200-foot enclosed space, whether it be, you're not allowed to enclose the deck. I don't know the answer. I'm just saying that this particular property really caused me some concerns because it was 15 feet away from the bank.
so why couldn't we say, I don't know, let me think a second. The verbiage I want.
Yeah, I mean, it was ugly, because they took advantage of a gap in our regulations, actually.
I don't think they took advantage. They kept it under 200 square feet. The point is,
They followed the
they
regulations.
followed the regulations.
So we want to change the regulations. So do we want to just eliminate the enclosed space piece of it?
That is what I'm saying. Or do you want to say, if you're within a certain linear footage to a bank, you can't do this and you have to elevate? I don't know the answer. I'm just bringing it to your attention that it caused me some concern during the hearing. And it's something that we need to just think more about. I want the board to go back, look at that plan. We can email you the plan tomorrow, and just think about it and see if this is something that you want to allow, because you will see more of these.
How many, well, okay, so that was going to be part of my question. So how many of those have come up recently?
Not many. This is actually the first one that was that
But
close.
that whole stretch,
Yeah.
they're all small homes right on the water.
Correct.
So if this guy gets away with it, the next guy's gonna do it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So,
So, I mean, I have no problem rebuilding that house in that footprint. My issue was that house should have been elevated up on pilings. It should have been raised and elevated up on pilings.
And what, didn't that fall in under the 50%?
They are saying it is, yes.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
close.
That's a Gary that we haven't quite gotten there yet, but that is on Gary's radar.
Because that's the other thing, is if it, if it exceeds the 50%, they'd have to do it anyway.
Mhm.
yeah,
So,
But this board can say, if you're within a certain linear footage of a bank, a marsh, or anything like that, then you need to go up on pilings. We don't, the 50% rule is a building code rule, it's not our
regardless
rule.
of enclosed.
Yeah,
yeah, I
That
think
sounds
that's
pretty
where we
clean.
should be going.
Yeah.
And we could, right now, we have the 200 square feet, but it could be either or and or.
yeah, it's something I want this board to think about, we'll send you the plan tomorrow and think about it.
If it's moving closer,
It
Have
didn't
you guys
move
thought
closer.
about, like, would it be a 25-foot
Well, it
buffer,
did-
50-foot buffer?
the
Something like that.
habitable space moved closer.
The habitable space did move closer, correct.
So we just need to put the word habitable in there. So if they had a deck and they're gonna enclose,
It
which
were-
gets back to what we call creep, right?
Courtney, it was 15 feet away.
I know what it was.
Again, I have no problem with that house being in that footprint as long as that house was elevated to V-zone standards.
Yeah, but.
And there it is.
There it is.
I can't imagine that's not gonna exceed 50%.
I can't either, but again, we will be watching that building permit. But again, it's something that, it recently came up, we're talking about V-zone regs, I thought it was worth a discussion, since the board really was concerned about it during the hearing. You remember that, you were there, Ron, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, it was close.
Oh, no, I saw it, actually, Ron and I were there at the same
Yeah.
time, but I wasn't at the meeting, so I wasn't on the quorum. But I remember seeing the property and seeing the plans, and yeah, and I agree, it's like, it's right there.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect example of a house that should have been elevated.
On pile, exactly.
Not simply on pilings, but actually elevated.
Elevated to V-zone's
Um,
construction standards, absolutely. Again, I have no problem with the house being in that footprint, but it needed to be elevated. And so, again, it's something that going forward, I think it warrants a discussion by this board, and so that we don't have that scenario again, as we are, thinking of ways to make our properties more resilient.
Jamie, you may be tuned into this better than I, because I'm sort of out of the building business for the most part. And that is, there was a game for a long time that was being played, which is renovations by bit. So somebody'd pull a permit for some small renovation, less than 200 feet, get it done, sign off, then they'd go and do another one, and they stayed under the 50%
Well,
rule.
the 200 square feet is cumulative, it's the 50%
The 50%
is,
part.
that's the loophole.
Yeah, is that still being exploited?
The 50%.
I mean, to be honest with you, years
There's a
ago,
lot
I
of you
lost
used
a
to-
job because of that.
Yeah.
Because I came in and said, oh, we need to do this whole thing and raise the house. The guy didn't want to do it, so.
Again, 50%, Courtney, is a building code
Yeah,
regulation. This board does not have to adhere to that 50%.
Right.
right.
So that, we just couldn't do anything, because it was right inside the regulations.
Yeah.
We didn't have an option.
No, so, but I think we can change the regulation to give this board an option.
So I would ask you guys to come up with a verbiage of
Okay.
what the setback should be, or enclosed, or a combination,
Okay,
and then hopefully we can whittle it down from
Okay.
there.
we will come up with something.
Because, yeah, that's,
That one caused me some pause.
yeah. And like Ron said, there's 100 others up the coast, so.
Okay,
And that's what we have to think about, because that's, we've run out of land, so
Yeah.
it's all these rebuilds now,
correct.
you know.
Yeah, we're gonna
Correct.
see more and more and
Right.
more of that.
Okay,
The mansionization of the coastline.
so, and the rest of these we've already touched on. Outdoor kitchens in a V-zone, new mitigation approved under an RDA, and sheds. So we will come up with something for you guys for the next meeting. I will make sure that in addition to emailing you the staff notes the night before, we will have them printed in case some of you forget them.
No,
Ron,
I-
What's
Betsy,
what's
Kevin,
the
Courtney?
what's the
I like
going
seeing them,
consensus?
so I appreciate that.
Yeah, we will print them out, so.
What's the going consensus on the outdoor kitchens in a V-zone?
I was getting water.
We didn't talk
What
about
is
it.
the going consensus on outdoor kitchens in a
We're still working
V-zone?
on creating a draft special condition for you to look at, and
Okay.
then just getting your approval and we'll start implementing it. Because we had discussed last time, you were talking about 3-dimensional fixed items in the footprint of an approved 2-dimensional like patio space, because that's where the vertical walls are coming from.
Yeah, 'cause
So,
this
which
is-
we can't approve in a V zone. So.
We are
once
seeing outdoor pizza ovens in a V-zone.
Oh, I know.
We've seen it. And we've already made a decision. They're just gonna give us the language.
Okay, all right. What was the general decision?
No.
No. Good.
Okay. So I know it was a lot to go over since we missed kind of January's meeting, but we're moving forward. Again, next time we're gonna The real low-hanging fruit is the procedure section, so I'll like kind of slash and burn that, bring it to you. Things like our administrative review, we've changed that. We changed the buffer regs years ago, but that never caught up. The fee schedule, things like that. So, administrative items that need to be cleaned up
Yep.
in the procedure section. And then, I mean, I think we're almost there. We don't have a lot more. I mean, I think it was the buffer zone regs, the land subject to coastal storm flowage regs, the procedure regs. I think we want to come back to you with some freshwater. Your freshwater dock regs, I think, need some tweaking. They follow in line the saltwater dock regs, which requires a 3-foot water depth at the terminus. We're gonna be going around and asking MES for the horsepower of each pond, and then coming up with something. We don't really feel like a freshwater pond, let's say on Jenkins Pond or Wings Pond or something like that, really needs to have that 3-foot water depth. If it's just for a kayak or like
That
a
makes
little
sense.
outboat, a little rowboat or something, but like a canoe or a kayak, we really don't need that water depth, and we really do need to give people the ability to have these small kayak docks on someplace like Jenkins Pond.
Well,
Which
you
are-
say most of those are in ponds that
Yeah.
that don't allow motors, so.
Yeah, and like a Shumet pond, you'll have a coastal plain pond shore. On low water years, you're gonna have a lot like very low water, and high water years, you're gonna have more water. The water fluctuates though there, and it's really difficult to achieve that 3-foot water depth unless this dock is way out into the pond.
Right, which
And we
don't
really
want.
don't wanna see that. A lot of the ones we're seeing, and you've seen a couple of them on Jenkins Pond, are these little seasonal structures, pipe structures that go in just for kayak access, and we're just trying to make it easier for someone on these ponds to achieve access to a water by kayak. We'll be bringing that to you. If there's any other topics in the regulations that the board feels needs tweaking, please let us know, and we will look at that. But we are trying to pinpoint things where we, as staff, have identified need some work, and that's what we're bringing to you.
I agree, and to the degree that's practical, let's get each one of these things, one at a time, knocked off the list and finalized.
Yep.
With a proposed summary, and then we vote on it, and then a summary.
Okay.
To start the next step, but just not to beat sheds to death, but once we get that worked out what we want, let's call it done.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's difficult because the sheds then go into how much mitigation are we gonna allow under an RDA? And then, so it goes from one to
That's
the
the
next,
problem
to
with
the
any
next.
time you try to revise
Yeah,
regulations.
so, I mean, we're trying to make this as streamlined as possible. We're trying to be as thorough for the board as possible. I mean, Alyssa and Fallon have done a great job recapping these meetings for you, so they're doing excellent work. So we're
When's
just
the
trying
next
to.
meeting?
We have them on the third Thursday of every month, so the next Thursday, I believe, is March 20th, because I do believe my husband.
You'll send out something.
Oh, March 20th.
Sorry, I'm gonna miss
What?
it.
20th?
I believe it's March 20th, yes. Let me
March
double check.
20th.
I won't be here. I'm sure it is.
And tomorrow morning, 8 AM at
8 AM at Cary Lane tomorrow morning.
that's
So
what,
I-
70
I have-
Cary Lane?
10 minutes, maybe 15 at the max.
That's fine. I have a half hour. I need to pick my husband up at the airport in Boston, so.
Well, we'll be racing up Route 3 together.
Oh, okay, great. But
Just try to get your eyes
Is this
on
number
it,
70 Cary Lane?
it's the 70 Cary Lane.
as it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So-
That's the important thing, is just,
This was asked for by the builder on record. He just wants one last effort to talk to the board, and we're gonna see what we can do. Okay?
Yeah.
So we'll see whomever can make it at 8 o'clock tomorrow at 70 Cary. Betsy, I already know you can't. Ron, you and I are on the same timeline.
I'll be
Even
there.
if you leave 15 minutes early, I can guarantee I'll catch you on the right.
I was just gonna tell you, be careful.
70 is on the ocean side, correct, yeah.
Well, no, because it's an inland pond, so yes, it's on, if you're going up Kerry Lane, it is on the left-hand side. You'll
On
see
the
all.
bay side,
What?
on the Buzzards Bay side?
It's in a,
Or no,
It's, if you go Kerry Lane,
you go up and it's a loop.
It's a loop.
it's either right or your left, it's a circle.
So what I'm saying
Where
is,
you going?
do I go,
Go
when I
either
get to
way.
the end
Either
where
way,
the loop
right or
starts,
your
do I go
left,
left?
depending on how you go.
Left is gonna take me kinda inland, right?
Yeah, that's what you wanna do.
that's what you
coordinate.
wanna do.
Yeah, okay.
Get to the bottom line.
Just find something.
Just keep
Just
going
look through
around.
my car
and eventually
coordinates.
you're gonna get to
Yeah.
70.
That's true.
Just look from
We're
it.
adjourned.
Thank you.